Well, hey everyone. Welcome to episode 328 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen with your host, Matt Payne. I'm recording this episode from my hotel room here in Flagstaff, Arizona, and you can probably expect to see a little bit more of this as my time traveling will increase here this coming year. On today's episode, I had a wonderful time speaking with a photographer named Xuan. She is from Singapore and she's focused most of her work on the landscapes of Japan. I first discovered her work through the recommendation of one of our listeners, and I became quite enamored with it, so much so that I decided to write an article about her and her work for On Landscape magazine. On today's podcast, Xuan and I discuss how her pursuit of photography helped her grieve the loss of her mother and how it has now become a vehicle for personal expression and exploration. Before we get started, I want to thank our latest supporter of the podcast on Patreon, Sandra Westerman. Without the support of listeners like Sandra on Patreon, this podcast would not continue. So thank you so much to everyone who has stepped up to help out in keeping the podcast alive. I really do appreciate it more than you can know. If you also would like to help out, please visit patreon.com/fstop and listen to join and support us. Thank you so much in advance. Okay, let's get to this week's episode with Xuan. All right, Xuan, it is so wonderful to have you on the podcast.
Hi, Matt. It's good to see you in person.
Right, it's virtually, of course, but it's almost like we see each other's face, which is super fun.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. I have to say that I had a absolute pleasure in writing that article about your photography for On Landscape a few months ago. It was so much fun just getting to look through all of your photography and then trying to piece together kind of the interplay between you and your photography. So I just wanted to thank you for letting me write that article.
Oh, thank you for writing such a beautiful article. I really appreciate it. I find it
Yeah.
difficult to talk about my photography, so to have someone else talk about my photography really helps.
Yes, it's so much easier, right? Awesome. Well, for people that maybe haven't read that article or aren't familiar with you and your photography, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Xuan-Hui Ng. I'm originally from Singapore, and I've been living and working in Japan for the past 12, 13 years. I used to be in the field of finance. I was an investment banker for about, I can't remember, 14, 15 years. And I left about 7, 8 years ago for good to set up a company to teach investment bankers and also to photograph more. Well, in order to photograph more, I should say.
Gotcha. So you're your own boss, so you can make your own schedule,
That's right. To the extent possible.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah, nice. And then so you're kind of doing a mixture of photography and these teaching these finance types things. And are you single, married, have kids, any of that going on?
Single, dating my camera. Yes, no kids. I have a brother and a sister, 7 years and 9 years younger. So I guess I'm sort of like an auntie to them. Right.
Yes. Okay. Awesome. Well, I'd love for you to tell us how you got into photography because it seems like a pretty drastic transition from finance.
Right. So yes, I was in the field of finance most of my life, and I think my first real encounter with the world of art was when I was shopping for a poster for my dormitory room when I was during my first year of college. I chanced upon the poster of Monet, Sunrise. I didn't know who he was, very embarrassingly, and but I fell in love with the image, his painting, and one thing led to another. I started reading up more about him, and then about the Impressionist movement. The second poster that went on my wall was Renoir's painting, well, poster. And then I fell in love with Chagall. But with photography, it was just about 12, 13 years ago. I lost my mom in 2000, year 2000, so straight after I came out of college. And certain relationship issues complicated the matter, and I was at the lowest point in my life. Then I think I reached the lowest point in my life, and I realized I needed to do something about it because it was affecting my friends and family. But it took 6 years for me to make that decision, or to reach that point. And I went to Tibet to volunteer at an orphanage, and that program also enabled the volunteers to go on some sightseeing trips. And it was on one such sightseeing trip that took us to Lake Namso. And it was sitting there at the edge of Lake Namso that I experienced a sense of peace that I've not felt for a very, very long time. I took some photographs with my point and shoot camera on the trip, and they turned out okay. And someone else had a digital SLR camera, and that planted a seed in my mind because I thought, oh, I probably can make better pictures if I had a better camera. So I went back to my work, to being an investment banker. But about 3 years later, when I was in between jobs, I decided to take some workshops at the Santa Fe workshops. And it was there at the Santa Fe shops, the photography school, where I met a number of teachers like Nevada Weir, Arthur
Hmm.
Myers, and Elizabeth Opelanik, who taught me the ABCs of photography.
Yeah, that's great. I've had Nevada Weir recommended for the podcast a few times, and I've reached out to her, so the name is familiar to me. So it's good to hear that people that are recommending good guests. Well, that's awesome. I'm curious. You were talking about the impressionistic painters, and I'm curious to what degree your fascination or interest in that type of painting has influenced the types of images that you make now with a camera.
I think that was my first impression of what art was, I guess, supposed to be. So, I mean, that formed my basic education. I mean, into the world of art, and so I think unconsciously and consciously, I think I'm looking to create or recreate that atmosphere. Mhm. So I think
Yeah.
it just filters into my photographs when I'm making work. I think it formed the way I saw things. Mhm.
Love it. Well, let's talk about your journey to Japan. I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about how you've been able to kind of rediscover yourself by photographing the landscapes that you find in Japan.
I think when I was in finance, I came to realize that every holiday I took was to Japan. So I thought, so an advice that I received from one of my ex-bosses, one of the managing directors whom I worked for, was you should first decide on where you want to live and then try to find a job there. So that was his advice. So I did that. I decided I wanted to move to Japan and started looking for a job there. I think so why Japan? I first traveled to Hokkaido, the northern part of Japan, to ski when I was a child. I think about 7 years old. So it's that nostalgia, I guess, for the good old childhood days where things were just so simple that kept the attraction for me. My mother was alive then. I think life was as a high school, actually, elementary kid was very, very simple. It was just like homework for the holidays, and that was about it. So I think it's just wanting to relive those memories that brought me back to Hokkaido, and then of course creating new ones there as well. Mhm.
And maybe tell us a little bit about what the landscape is like there. I mean, I think there's a lot of mountainous terrain and deciduous trees, but beyond that, I my knowledge of Japan is pretty limited. So maybe you can kind of paint a picture for us, no pun intended.
Right. So I think Hokkaido is well the north, like one of the northernmost island in Japan. A lot of it is agricultural land. For example, my ski coach would teach skiing in winter, and he would be a farmer in other seasons. And they would farm. I think it's the biggest producer. Hokkaido is the biggest producer of a number of agricultural products. I think like potatoes, maize. I'm not sure about rice. It's surrounded by mountains and lakes and forests, so it's really beautiful. The temperatures fluctuate quite a fair bit within the day. Like I was there in May. In the morning, it was like 0 degrees Celsius, but by the afternoon, it was 20 degrees Celsius. So that's quite a big change. In winters, it gets very cold, minus 16 degrees Celsius and below, and so that's 3 degrees Fahrenheit and below. And according to the locals, it was like such cold days were much more frequent in the past.
Hmm,
So we are seeing weather changes there, climate changes. I think the temperatures there have been increasing on average.
gotcha. Sounds very similar to where I live. I mean, you touched on this a little bit, but how has photography become a vehicle to help you overcome grief?
I think first and foremost, it was a distraction. It was a new habit that distracted me. And I think being surrounded by nature, I think studies have shown that nature has the power to heal, and even images of nature. So I think just being around it, personally, I felt that everything just proceeded at a slower pace. I was able to enjoy just being. I mean, I was in the field of finance, so there were deadlines. Everything was in a rush. There was a lot of pressure. There was a lot of human politics, like strategizing, maneuvering. So,
Right.
but nature is just simple. It's pure. It's without ambitions and intentions. So I think being there, being surrounded by nature, I was able to relax. For me, photographing was just a means to prolong the sense of peace I felt when surrounded by nature. It was that little token that I would take with me after each trip to remind me of what it was like to be surrounded by nature.
Got it. And for you, how long did that process take in terms of engaging with the landscape with your camera and then feeling like you had made significant progress towards dealing with or handling your feelings of grief?
I think for the first 4 or 5 years after starting photography, I was still in investment banking. So I think the little trips that I made to photograph landscapes, usually it's like 4 or 5 days, maybe each season. So that helped, but it was just like putting out fires, right? I was stressed, and then I went on a trip. I got better, and then I go back to the good old finance and got stressed again. And on the back of it was the grief, like dealing with the grief and the issues. So I think it was only when I really left investment banking that gave me more time to photograph. And that was when I did a mentorship with through the Santa Fe workshops with Nevada Weir for I think I renewed it twice, so like 3 times. So well, perhaps about 3 years we would meet virtually, once a month, or every time I have work to show her. So so that made it. So I think having someone to regularly show my work to helped to create and add to the process. In terms of feeling the effects, yeah, I would say it's after I left investment banking, and but it became so natural. I mean, it wasn't like conscious. It wasn't a conscious moment that I felt, I healed. It was. I think it just took time, and but I felt I was getting better. I was getting happier, basically. I wasn't unhappy or sad anymore. So that was how I would, I guess, measure
Yeah.
effects of photography, photographing nature. Mhm.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, one of the things that I really appreciate about your photography is that it seems like you have collected a wide range of images that are focused on these ephemeral moments that are very fleeting, that you have to kind of be there to see it and experience it, and you have to have the photography skills to know when to capture the image at the right moment. And for me, those are some of my favorite types of nature photographs. So I'm curious for you, how have you been able to find ways to photograph such incredible ephemeral moments so consistently?
I have to say that I've been very, very lucky. I think luck plays, I mean, of course, the knowledge of the weather, photography skills matter, but I think luck plays a tremendous part in my photography. Nature is my collaborator in these images. Sometimes I chance upon these wonderful scenes. Of course, as I got to learn more about the weather patterns, I begin to search actively for example, for fog instead of just chancing upon them. For diamond dust, it's the same thing. I think, but the element of luck still remains because sometimes I would just be driving by and I would see this amazing scene, and by discovering these like scenes by accident, I learn more about the place and about nature. So it's sort of like a virtuous cycle that feeds onto the other. So yeah, but I've been very, very lucky. Mhm.
Well, they say that luck favors the prepared.
Yes, I would like to think that I'm prepared. But for example, there was this once, I had a great lunch, right? And I was feeling very guilty because I thought, I lost some time photographing. So I thought, okay, I will go to photograph, right? After lunch, I have the camera at the back of my car. And so I went to somewhere close, but somewhere where I usually wouldn't go to at that point in time. And then I chanced upon this massive numbers of snowbugs. So they are aphids with white wings, and they were glistening in the setting sun. So that was a chance encounter. There was another time where I went to a place to photograph in the morning. I left my lens on the bridge, so where I was photographing. And so in the afternoon, I suddenly realized that, and I had to go back to the same place, right, that I've had photographed in the morning. And then I discovered again snowbugs. So, so I was just sometimes it's really a matter of luck. And I feel that because I'm so blessed with these opportunities, I feel a greater sense of need to create these images, to do justice to its beauty, and to show my gratitude, right, to nature. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's funny though because yeah, you have to be lucky, but also it takes a certain amount of observational skills and probably some intangibles as well for someone to be able to recognize that there's a photograph in what you're observing?
Yeah, I think I photograph sometimes by gut. I just go to what attracts me, and like sometimes I just see a potential in a place and I would stay there for very long. But at other times I would just pass it by. So I guess it's the chemistry between the place and the photographer.
Yeah, I love that. Well, as you already know, I am very fond of your photography, and to me, it kind of seems like you just came out of nowhere. Like one day, I didn't know who you were, and then the next day, I had a bunch of people saying you need to look at this person's work. There, it's really good. So, what do you think has been your secret to building your talent so quickly?
Nevada Ware. Nevada Ware is my secret. I think the years of and of course Santa Fe workshops where I met all the other teachers because I would go back. I think I was there after I left banking for good for another series of workshops. And then I went back again after a few years to learn more about the technical side. So the teachers whom I've met there have been instrumental in my development as a photographer. And the mentorship, the three, uh, probably 3 years of mentorship with Nevada really, really helped. I just couldn't get enough of her, so I just kept renewing my mentorship with her. I think that was just so much to learn, and so, like, she trained me up technically. But not just that. She is an amazing teacher because she does not impose her style on me, but instead she helped me discover my voice in photography and helped me develop it through those 3 years. So I always mention her because without her, like this would not have been possible. And I think, and I was getting a little impatient. I wanted to show my work, to the world, but not realizing that I was not ready then. So I think she was very good at pacing me. And once she felt I was ready, she referred me to Mary Virginia Swanson, who is the marketing guru, professional in photography, and she guided me in my next in the next step of my journey. Mhm.
So, in terms of your development, obviously having a mentor or someone that can give you feedback on the direction you're taking your images and feedback on how well you're executing on the technical side, and then you mentioned as well like helping you develop your own voice. I'm curious if you can point to one or two techniques or kind of general things that she would do when you were with her that felt the most impactful in terms of your development.
I think at the beginning it was about watching the edges. Sorry, I was,
Oh,
you know,
yes.
that, I mean, I didn't know photography, right? So she taught me the ABCs of photography. So it's just like, oh, watching the edges. I remember traveling with her I think it was to China and to India um, after I left banking. And I remember, like, in the image, sorry, when we photograph a scene, she would notice things like, oh, there's a plastic bag there, which is going to be distracting. So, so it's things like these that I wasn't aware of. And I would bring these tips back to my own landscape photography, like, oh, watch that branch. Well, of course, we can't really like remove it, but if there is like a leaf, sitting like a random one sitting there, I would just be careful to like for example move it aside for the time being and then move back later.
Right, or just recompose.
Right, that's right. Take a step to the right, take a step to the left. And the other thing that really stayed with me was that she said to be like when looking through our images when editing. I think that's where she helped me a lot, which was to identify what the strengths of an image are. And she would remind me to be objective when looking at the image and not be influenced by the experience I had when making the image. So, for example, I might have suffered frostbite, and like climb through uh, a lot of things to make that image, but that shouldn't make that image more valuable to me as a result of the experience of having made the image. So, I think that was very valuable.
Mm.
Sorry, there was another person whom I nearly forgot to mention, and that's Takahashi Masumi. He's a local photographer in Hokkaido, where I photograph, and he was the one who guided me around the place and also taught me about the local magical phenomena like diamond
Mm.
dust. So without him, it's also like I would not have been able to make these images.
What is diamond dust?
Diamond dust, it's they are basically ice crystals that form in the air when the temperatures plunge like to like 3 degrees Fahrenheit and below. There must be the right amount of humidity for the air to crystallize. It's like Goldilocks, like there must be enough of this, enough of that. And the sun must be bright the next day, so cloudless and windless. That's when you get the optimal conditions to witness this amazing scene. But I think over the past few years, it's been getting increasingly rare to witness diamond dust um, because temperatures are on a rise and the weather is becoming more erratic. So it's a bit sad.
Yes. Well, I wanted to go back to the mentorship piece just one more time and ask you one more question about kind of your vision and your voice because when I look at your work, it definitely has some unique characteristics that are above and beyond what I would say are just, technical tips and tricks that someone can point out and fix, in terms of composition and things like that. And I'm wondering if you can maybe help us understand what mentorship did in terms of pointing you in a direction that was authentic to your what you wanted from your photography while them not imposing upon you their own kind of style.
I think one thing which Nevada encouraged me to do when I was making the images was to think in terms of to group my images in terms of themes. And that was helpful for showing it on websites as well, and also in terms of grouping my images. But the themes that she selected were based on like emotional words. So, like loneliness.
Mm.
So, turbulence, for example. So, I think that was an interesting approach. The interesting thing was when she first looked at my images, when I, first met her virtually and showed her my collection of images. I think she saw many of them as loneliness. So I thought, what about solitude? Solitude sounds a little more positive. No, I think they are loneliness. So that was quite interesting because I didn't see it. I didn't see it as being loneliness. I guess it was reflective of how I was feeling. So, in a way, the images were showing what I was feeling inside.
Mm.
But when I was making the images, I was ecstatic. I was just happy, but not realizing that the images probably reflected an inner state.
Mm.
So I'm not sure, but I suppose the voice in my image is that of For example, loneliness, or for example, the sense of calm I felt, um, which was interesting, which is an interesting discovery for myself as well.
Yes, yes, I think that's something a lot of people are seeking in their own photography in terms of having a stronger connection to more than just what's the literal interpretation of what's being photographed. And maybe that's a good segue to talk about projects because what I've noticed in your work as well is that you have these very cohesive sets of images that seem to have a focus around an intention, around an idea, around a concept, or around some type of story that you're trying to tell or something you're trying to work through. And I'd be curious if you could tell us why you've chosen to work in this way and how that's working out for you.
I have to be honest with you and tell you that they are actually more time-based.
Oh, okay.
So, for example, Metamorphosis was built over 10 years. Although most of the images that you see there are from the last, probably, sorry, until 2010. So it was after I left banking, so about 4 or 5 years. Because that was after starting the mentorship with Nevada. That was when I started making images that I liked, that survived the test of time. So even though I started in 2010, the images that remain were from probably 2016 to 2020, I think. Like, sorry, before 20, it was like 19 or so. Remembrance was definitely a project based, like a theme based project. And I started that in 2016. In other words, I started my chasing after cherry blossoms in 2016. When after I left banking because I had more time. And this project was in memory of my mother. I think for the longest time, I tried to suppress my memories of her because they were just too sad. When I see like a mother and daughter shopping, right, I would be sad because I would think of my mother. And so I just tried not to think of her. But then I realized that over time, that if you stop thinking of something, you forget something. So I was losing the remaining memories I had of her, and
Hmm.
I couldn't let that happen. So, photographing cherry blossoms was a way for me to preserve that memory, as well as to create new ones, but with her spirit present with me, so that it's not that sad. So it doesn't touch that point, but it's still it's a happier way to remember her, to celebrate her life.
Hmm.
Like in Japan, cherry blossoms are the national flower, and they are symbolic of the concept of mono no aware, which speaks to the impermanence of life,
Hmm.
and it recognizes that it is this very transient nature of life that makes us appreciate our encounters even more. So to
Yes.
me, it's special in that way. For the other projects, I think you would see that two were started during COVID-19. COVID-19 brought everything online for me, brought my work online. For the first, I think, 4 or 5 months, when everything was in lockdown in Japan, I was basically jobless. I mean, nobody really understood or believed in the concept of online learning at that time. And everyone thought that things would resume very quickly.
You
So,
were you were ahead of your time.
right. So I was basically jobless for a couple of months, and but that meant I was able to photograph. Um, I started renting an apartment in Hokkaido very, very coincidentally, in I think it was in February that year. I've been planning to do that, and having an apartment in Hokkaido meant I could just stay there and like not stay in hotels anymore. So I can cook, I can be isolated, and I can continue my photography. So that was, in a way, a blessing in disguise for me. That
Hmm.
was the silver lining for me. And so photographing it every day meant I saw the sun shift every day, like horizontally, like laterally. So I was learning about fog, and for some reason, I was just so attracted by fog during that period of time. Perhaps it mirrored the way I was feeling, like very uncertain about the future, and just like waiting in anticipation for the moment the fog dissipated. So that was this. I think chasing the fog just kept me occupied and hopeful. So that was great. But for the second year of COVID, I think I found the second year of COVID more difficult to deal with. I'm not sure about you, but it was more difficult for me because I think I was expecting everything to resume to normal, but it didn't, right? And vaccines were quite late in Japan. We didn't get it until like probably 6 months to a year after the
Hmm.
states had it. And so I wanted to like my plans to go back to Singapore or to do another workshop with Freeman Patterson had to be postponed. I think that was more uncertainty. But for the second year, I found myself chasing after light. So the first year was fog, the second year was light. Um, so in a way, the projects were time based. I guess it reflected the state of mind that I was in and the mood that I was in, and perhaps the level of maturity that I had at that point in time.
Yeah,
So
that's so fascinating because I feel like on any given week, where I'm at in my head and my emotions shifts so much that I don't know that that would work for me.
yeah, I don't know. I think for me, it's like a general, a general shift. So yeah, it just happened to
No,
me.
that's awesome that you can channel that into an idea or a project. I'm curious, what are some advantages in working in projects that some people might be overlooking?
I think for landscape photography, for me at least, it feels that, for example, like cherry blossoms, you only get it once a year, right? So, and it's not every year that you can make images that you like or that you will continue liking after a period of time. So I think it's useful in that sense because then you can put your images together and then reassess them as one further grow as a photographer. So especially in my case, so I think that's the benefit for me.
Do you,
What's your way of organizing your work or photograph?
oh, I'm chaos. I'm all over the place. I wish I had more discipline when it came to that. You know, I'm starting to get there a little bit more in terms of kind of the way I think and the way I'm working in the field. But for the most part, I tend to categorize my photography into like, themes. So like forests or mountains or more subject based. And I would like to get more to kind of what you're talking about in terms of um, concepts or ideas or emotions. I think that would be much more interesting, but I haven't had the time or energy yet to sit down and organize it in that particular way yet, but it is something that I want to do in the near future.
I think I was thinking of going the other way around, which is subject based. Because I think one issue that I have with the concept is I think one worry that I had was it's not universal. In the sense that, for example, when I look at an image and I feel that it's joyous, right? Someone else might not feel that it's joyous.
Hmm.
So that's a concern that I've always had. Because I remember showing one image and someone was, oh, this is such a happy image, right? Someone said. But someone else said, oh, this is such a sad image. So the the feedback can be quite the opposite. But then I realized that I'll just say what I think it is, and probably that's one approach. But my concern is always that it's not sufficiently universal.
Yeah, I mean, I think that harkens to one of the main challenges we have as artists is that there's always what we think our photo is about or what it represents, and then there's everyone else looking at its opinion of what it is and what it's about. And I think it's totally okay for there to be a huge difference between those two things because that they don't have to, they don't need necessarily to be the same interpretation. And in fact, for me, I think it's really exciting when someone looks at something that I don't even see anything in it. I'm like, oh, it's just a really cool sunset that I captured, and someone else is like, oh, this reminds me of recovering from alcoholism. I'm just like, what? You know what I mean? Like, what are you talking about? So I think that's pretty cool when that happens.
Yes, yes, it is. I think the way we look at images, look at anything, it's always colored by our own backgrounds, right?
Yeah.
Our own upbringing, for example. So it's interesting to have different people interpret it. And that's one big lesson I learned, which is um, like some people like a certain image and some people hate it. So at the end of the day, it's what you feel about the image that really matters, I think.
So your projects being time based, it sounds like at any given time you might be working on multiple projects at the same time.
Yes, that's right. So, for example, my cherry blossom project is ongoing, and I think I think I might be able to create some theme-based ones. For example, like diamond dust, because I think some of these natural phenomena do warrant a project by itself, but I think it's just so difficult to collect, to create sufficient images, like say within one season. It's just impossible. So I would just have to keep working for many years in order to create sufficient images. And actually, there's another reason for it being theme based. I think as a photographer, I'm always trying to um, outdo my previous self, to
Yes, of
outgrow
course.
my. So I think every year or every couple of months, I feel the need to make some progress, or to grow in a certain way. So I think that also helps to push me to photograph maybe in a slightly different way or to see things in a slightly different way. And because I keep going back to the same places, and I'm someone who gets bored quite easily, so I feel an urge from the inside to do things differently, and I think that is also what pushes me to create a new project.
Hmm.
It's sort of like a clean start, and then I go, ah, okay, I'm done with the previous one. I'm going to start a different one. So I think
Hmm.
that helps to perhaps mentally. So I'm basically playing with my own psychology and saying, oh, you're moving in this direction, so let's have a clean start. Mhm.
That sounds very similar to where I was at maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I feel like now I've just given myself more permission to think less about what I'm doing and just react to kind of what I find, and then afterwards I can piece it together and understand what it is I was honing in on or what caught my attention, because I feel like if you go the other way, you risk kind of forcing it a little bit in terms of, oh, I have to do something new or different or exciting, and then you might, I know this is maybe for me anyways, mm, you might miss out on the opportunity to focus on something that might not feel like it's new or different or exciting, but it actually has the much more potential to be different or interesting.
Oh, I fully agree with you. I think when I say new, it's just like telling myself it will be new, but when I go execute it, it's whatever that catches my eye. But I don't know. I just hope that that mindset, that desire to see things differently would influence me in a certain way. But yeah, when I'm on the field, it's just whatever I get attracted by. I would do big landscapes or images that are simpler by construction, but just because it's beautiful, and I feel that I cannot lose that opportunity to make that image. Um, and and so I guess I'm quite easy on myself when I photograph. Mhm.
Yeah, no, I am too. I actually just did a about a week of photography in northern Spain, and we didn't have fantastic weather conditions, but it was okay. But I came home with some pretty decent images that I was happy with. And when I was in the field, there was definitely some days where I was like, yeah, I don't think that was any good, and I was right. They wasn't very good, but there was also other days where I was super excited, and I came home with two or three or four images that from that single day. So I just, it's okay to have a bad outing.
Right, and I think that's a very good point. It's okay to have a bad outing. And I think when I was taking a workshop with Freeman Patterson and Andre Galland, the enthusiasm for nature, the love for nature, just reminded me of my earlier objective, which was just to have fun, right? And
Yes.
just to enjoy being in nature and photographing was just a way to prolong that sense of serenity. So it's not that's not the original goal. So I think they reminded me of that objective I had, but which I forgot over time.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about overcoming grief. We've talked about having fun. We've talked about personal expression. What are some other ways in which nature photography has enhanced your life?
How has it enhanced my life? I think I'm not sure if it's. I think because of COVID, I've been rethinking where I want to live. So, and because I enjoy being in nature so much, I think I'm thinking of moving for good to Hokkaido, out of Tokyo. I'm still based out of Tokyo now because I first moved to Tokyo because that's where the finance industry is, right? The most active,
Hmm.
the capital. But I think I'm ready to leave and move to the countryside, like to somewhere more rural. And it's interesting because I never thought I would do that. I've always been a city girl. I'm from Singapore, like where everywhere is like skyscrapers and so concrete jungles. So it's quite interesting. So I think it's changed my overall outlook. I think it started with my mother's death. That I mean, her death made me realize that life can be really short. She died at 50. So I mean, when I was young, I thought I wanted to be like a CEO of a company. I wanted to rise to the top, things like that. So all that's out of the window.
Mm.
And with COVID, right, it just reminded me of the fragility of life and how
Hmm.
important it is, right, to live your life and how less important it is to be like in a city. So I think it's really helped me recalibrate, redefine what I what I view as important in life.
Hmm. No, that resonates a lot with me. It's funny how as you get older, your perspectives on these things change because I can remember maybe 10 years ago, all I wanted to do was like improve my leadership skills and, rise in a company and like become like maybe the CEO or like the chief operating officer and, you know, have monetary success, but the more time I spent in photography and in nature and just experiencing it, the less I value money, the less I value work and all that. Money is important, of course, but I don't know. I come to value like life experiences and getting the most out of my experiences in nature, and photography is the vehicle that gets me there. So I'm what you just said resonates a lot with me because I moved from a big city to another big city to where I live now, which is a city of 20,000 people, and I'm really close to the mountains, and I don't regret it at all. I mean, it's way more expensive to live here, but and there's no jobs here at all. But yeah, my opportunities to be in nature and to be a photographer have increased exponentially. So I would definitely encourage you to follow that intuition that you're feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've been thinking of, I mean, this job that I have now, I mean, it's still a link with investment banking. But I'm wondering how I can move more into, like, immerse myself more into photography. So I think that might be, and it might not be immediately, but maybe a few years later, that's something that I need to reassess. If there are more jobs, within the world of photography that I can take and live off of. Because now I still need to teach in order to keep my employment visa. I need my day job.
Right.
So, but hopefully over time, I can be able to find more opportunities in photography and just, yeah, fully immerse in it and leave finance forever. So that would be my goal.
Well, I definitely wish you luck there. Um, Tell us about your recent article in Elements magazine.
So my next article for Elements is on the idea of is on the issue of preconceptions. I think back in 2018, I reached a roadblock in my photography. I was failing to make images that I liked, and I was frequently fighting disappointment. And I think after struggling for some time, I realized the issue was I was becoming a little too particular about the images that I wanted to make or the conditions that I wanted to photograph in.
Hmm.
For example, if there was not enough, insufficient amount of fog, I would feel that the image would not be a success. Or if there are insufficient number of snowbugs, with white wings glistening in the sky, then it's not good enough. So I think I was having all these preconceptions and being bound by them. So there would be days where I would perhaps not go out and just be lazy because I feel that the conditions are not right. Arthur Myson, who taught me at the Santa Fe workshops in, I think, 2010, he said in an interview with John Paul Caponegro that he's always tried to, let me quote him, I've always tried to avoid preconceptions. Otherwise, you're more likely to be disappointed by what you don't find and more likely to overlook the obvious. It's important to learn to play the hand that's dealt to you. So it's something similar to what you said earlier. And I wanted to share this quote because preconceptions was at the root of my problems. I think I simply forgot to enjoy going out, and not say, oh, because I wanted to photograph this, so I'm going out now. But I'm going out because I enjoy being out. So I think that's really important. So, but being able to identify my problem did not translate into a solution. So, a good friend of mine, Tanya Amachayev, recommended that I take a workshop with Freeman Patterson and Andre Gallant. And I did in 2019, and it proved to be a turning point in my life. I mean, both of them, Freeman and Andre, they love photography and they love nature. So, like just being around them made me realize that I was losing that enthusiasm, and I was forgetting the purpose of photographing. And so they had some really simple exercises that brought me back to the basics. I think they had one where we had to stay in one spot and photograph for like 30 minutes. So that was a huge challenge to seeing things creatively. But it was that exercise, that first exercise on the first day of our workshop, that made me realize that creativity is the solution to everything. So I think it was this workshop with them that helped me exit my struggles. Mhm.
I love that.
So,
I had a very
mm,
similar experience myself. I've talked about it on the podcast before, but I used to be very, very, very tied to preconceived ideas or conditions or specific images in my mind that I wanted to capture. And if I showed up to a location and it wasn't like what I thought it was going to be, that was really depressing and it would upset me. And of course, I'm sure there was like 100,000 other pictures within 20 feet radius of where I was standing when I was upset. But I was letting those preconceptions drive my whole process, and I don't do that anymore, and it helps tremendously.
right, I think it's liberating when we are not like when we do not have goals like that, like, oh, I like going to photograph that. And because when we miss it, like you said, we will become really disappointed, right? And we're finding that disappointment as well. So I think it just complicates the matters by having these preconceptions. It's quite
Yeah.
funny. Last year, I was photographing. I had my camera and like my tripod focused on one tree, and I was like waiting for I was hoping and waiting for the flowers to fly, the petals to drop and fly. But then suddenly, I heard the wind on my right, and I saw petals flying over a different tree. So I had to like uproot myself and then rush to this other part of this beautiful forest. And like you said, it can be so close and we just miss it because we are so set on something else. So that was a good reminder for me to look around.
Yeah.
Look around. Yeah. So in the article, I also wrote about my COVID experience, which I spoke to you about earlier in greater detail. So that's what will be coming up in my next Elements article.
I love it. And last but not least, what kind of workshops do you have coming up that our audience should know about?
Yeah, it's going to be my maiden workshop.
All
uh,
right, let's get some guinea pigs.
at Santa Fe Workshops, my alma mater. And so I'm really excited to be teaching there because that's where I learned, you know, um, that's what changed my life, right? Photography
Hmm.
did. So I'm excited to be teaching there and also to speak with more concrete details on how I photograph.
Love it. When is that happening?
September, it's going to happen, I think, in the second half of September. Mhm.
Okay,
It'll be an
awesome.
online workshop.
Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect. Well, good deal. So last question, who do you recommend for the podcast? Who are some people that have inspired you or some people that we should learn more about?
We were talking about projects earlier, and I think when I saw this person's website, and this person is Samuel Farron, I saw his website. I think I was blown away because I think there were very few images for each project, but they were so cohesive
Hmm.
aesthetically. And I fell in love with his work a few years ago, and I follow him, his like Instagram, social media, and I hope to create images like his. So something more emotional, and his use of colors is beautiful. I mean, Xuan-Hui Ng, I know you have interviewed her before. I mean, I love her use of black and white. If it's for
Oh, yeah.
example, it's like a very similar feel, but in color. So I'm
Okay.
a fan of both of their work. Another person is Maurice Henry, and I met him at Freeman Patterson and his workshop last year. He's the founder of Cameras for Healing, and I think it's a very, very meaningful project that he's undertaken. He equips people with cameras to help them heal from their past traumas. He has done that for people in Canada, which is where he's from, but he has also traveled to other countries, like, say, Somalia, Africa, to help people there as well. So, and I've seen his photographs; they're beautiful too. so, so um, I hope you can speak with him too. Then there is Ragnar. Um, I think his last name is Sigurdsson. Sorry, I must have butchered his last name, but
That's okay.
Ragnar is from Iceland, and he makes some incredible images. I think he's a cancer survivor, and I think I think he has a book on fire and ice. It's just it's quite amazing, and I think in order to make I've always felt that in order to make good images, you really need to be there, right? And spend enough time there to familiarize yourself with the landscape. Of course, he's a local, and so some amazing scenes. That said, Daniel Corden is a photographer whom I just started following recently. He guides people on tours to different places like Indonesia and Hokkaido. And although he doesn't spend a lot of time at each of the places, he makes some really beautiful photographs. So that kind of redefined my understanding. I was like, oh, maybe you don't have to spend that much time after all. So I started following him. He has a signature style. The way he processes his images, which I thought was quite interesting, quite dreamy. Um,
Yeah. I
but what
feel like
I'm
that guy is in a new country like every week.
right, but I'm amazed at how he manages to make good images from each place, despite being there for such a short time. So I would like to learn his secrets.
Well, Photoshop is pretty powerful these days. I'll just say that.
I know he has a Photoshop program, so I would love to better learn about that. Hmm. And then, of course, there is Seth Resnick, who is another of my mentors. He has photographed actively in Antarctica and a number of places. I think I remember taking a workshop with him a couple of years ago, and he reprocessed one of my images using Lightroom, and he changed it completely. It was it was beautiful. Like the emotions that that I could feel from his version was just quite amazing. So it opened my eyes to the power of processing. I
Yeah,
think for me, I tried to stay as I for me I tried to stay as much as possible as close as possible to what nature had presented me, because I think I see myself in a way, using this word is not right, documentarian, but I see myself as recording the scene, and trying to replicate the emotions that I felt when I made the image. But I think to the extent possible, I try to stay closer to what the image, to what the scene was. So, but it's food for thought, I felt. So
for sure.
it's quite interesting. Anyway.
Yeah.
So these are the
Well,
people whom I recommend. You have recommend like you have interviewed so many people on my list of favorites, so it's difficult to recommend more.
I know it's getting harder every week.
And you already have
Well,
Nevada Weir on your list, so that's fantastic.
yeah.
Mhm.
Well, Xuan, this has been awesome, and I am so happy we could finally make this conversation a reality.
Yes, thank you. Thank you again for writing about my work and now for interviewing me. Thank you so much. Thank you for
Of,
this opportunity.
of course. Well, thank you to Xuan for the wonderful conversation here on the podcast. I am really looking forward to seeing more of your amazing photography, so please keep it up. I highly encourage listeners to take a look at her work as it is both excellent and quite unique. Thank you again to everyone who has helped keep the podcast going by supporting us on Patreon. I really appreciate it. That's all for now. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.